All right. So we are moving on to chapter 4, The Eagle Bloods Its Claws. Let's find out what that means. If Sam Houston was undergoing a series of crucial experiences in these years, his future adversary Santa Anna was having similar experiences in Mexico. No single event in Tennessee would exert the overpowering influence on Houston that an affair in the northern province of Tejas was about to have on Santa Anna. In August of 1813, when Santa Anna was 19, his brutal and vengeful leader, Arredondo, crossed the Rio Grande at Laredo and marched north to punish Republican rebels at San Antonio de Bejar. As General Arredondo penetrated those furnace-hot, dusty plains, his resolve hardened. Summoning his officers one evening when the little capital still lay 3 days distant, he harangued them. Who are these rebels? Let's face facts. There are nearly 3,200 of them, only 2,000 of us. But do not lose heart, for we are trained military men, with many battles behind us, with strict discipline, with knowledge of operations, and with Gomez de Padilla here with his 6 cannon. The advantage is all with us. So I ask again, who are these rebels? 1,700 are Mexican citizens of Spanish blood who've gained the idea that they can establish some kind of free state up here, excused from the laws we issue in Mexico City. They must be crushed, and I want no prisoners. 600 of the others are deluded Indians who are always ready to fight for any big word, like freedom or liberty, words they couldn't define if you asked them. Kill what you have to. The rest will run away, so let them go. We don't want them cluttering up our lines. The other 900? Now here's the ugly problem. I'm told they're mostly Americans who have sneaked in over the border at Louisiana. Many of them cutthroats, bandits, thieves, renegades. If their own government caught them, they'd all be hanged for crimes committed there. Now they try to steal Tejas, and they must be chastised. No prisoners. When this battle is over, I want a solemn gasp to spread from Louisiana to Washington. So this is what happens when outsiders invade Mexico. I want the Americans to know what they're up against if they dare to touch our sacred soil. When he finished this tirade, his face red with passion, he more calmly issued a series of crisp directives to his officers, which revealed both his plan for an annihilating battle and his considerable competency as a field leader. We shall approach the rebels with only a few of our troops visible in the front ranks. Lieutenants Moncado and Santa Anna will be in command, and when the fighting grows intense, they will retreat as if overwhelmed. We can be sure the rabble will accept our bait. They will come crashing after our retreated men, and at that moment, I rush forward with our entire force and crush the rebels. Then, annihilation, with the 6 cannon of Gomez Padilla smashing them to bits. Lieutenant Moncado recognized the brilliance of this proposal were it to be executed against a true rabble who could be expected to chase any fleeing figure. But he had read 2 books about the sophistication with which American armies had battled the English in the War of 1776. He warned General Arredondo that if this Republican army at San Antonio, so superior in numbers, had American leadership comparable to that in their war against the English, the trap might not work, and it could be the exposed Spanish troops who would be annihilated. Ah, my son, you're right. If the Americans and their deluded Mexican allies had real leadership, but tell me, who were the leaders of the Americans in the 1776 war you speak of? Frenchmen and Germans and Poles. They taught the stupid Americans how to fight. That mob up there has no Lafayette, and this time they'll be facing a Spanish army. By the accidents of the battle, with neither side making a conscious choice of site or relative advantage, the two armies stumbled together on a broad field near the little Rio Medina. The rabble, sensing that they well outnumbered the government forces, launched an assault on Arredondo's formation. Because of their fine marksmanship, the Kentucky and Tennessee vagrants succeeded in driving back Lieutenant Mercado on the Spanish left and the Lieutenant Santa Anna on the right. In fact, the Spanish army was so heavily hit that its ranks broke and general retreat began. "After them! After them!" an American voice shouted from amidst the rebel front. "Ataque!" cried a Spanish officer, leaping forward. Then came the harsh, commanding voice of another, saner American. "Men! For Christ's sake, stop! It's a trap!" The men tried his best to halt the mad plunge forward, but accomplished nothing. He was still shouting, "Trap! Trap!" when the tail end of the American horde swept past him. The so-called Battle of Medina was a sickening affair, for almost every one of General Arredondo's men did precisely as ordered. Santa Anna and Moncada closed the trap. Gomez Padilla fired his cannon right into the heart of the confused rebellion, and Arredondo himself dispatched extra troops to any spot in the Spanish lines which seemed likely to bend or break. Despite great carnage, the Spanish army could not kill all the men within its trap, and some of the rebels broke free through sheer weight of numbers. As they fled across the fields, Arredondo unleashed his skilled cavalry, which ran down the Americans and the Mexicans as if they were rabbits or wild pigs. The Indian they ignored, for they could be counted upon to fade harmlessly back into the endless plains if they survived. The tremendous victory that August day would of itself have made a profound impression on young Santa Anna, for it proved that a disciplined army trained in European tactics could achieve against a collection of American adventurers and misguided provincials, calling for equality with the Peninsulares. But it was the following slaughters that made the indelible imprint. When the cavalry rounded up several hundred fleeing rebels, including many Americans, the grizzled leader of the Spanish horsemen ordered the prisons to dig a long, shallow ditch across which timbers were stretched. Once these timbers, scored of prisoners, were marched and then gunned down by firing squads who performed so efficiently that the corpses pitched headfirst into the waiting ditch. That night, Arredondo crammed more than 300 other prisoners into an improvised jail with the town of San Antonio. By morning, 18 had suffocated or been strangled by the pressure of other bodies. About half the survivors were dragged into the public square and shot. The others were put to work on the roads. American soldiers were executed wherever caught, but the thing that most impressed Santa Anna was General Arredondo's harsh treatment of any civilians who were suspected of having supported the rebels to even the slightest degree. They were summarily shot. When the multiple executions ended, the general indicated that his troops could enjoy the town, which they did by looting, by raping in the public streets, and by inventive punishment of gathering together in a kind of jail all the older gentlewomen of the town, who were forced for 18 days to do laundry for the victors and bake them tortillas, while the soldiers laughed. Santa Anna, watching the completeness of this victory, the masterful manner in which the Americans were defeated, the ineffectiveness of the Mexican proletariat, and the harshness with which the civilian population was punished, whether guilty or not, gained the idea that this was the effective way to handle even mild protests. But perhaps the most significant of his reactions was the contempt he generated for Americans in general. The unquestioned honors that Santa Anna won at Medina were somewhat sullied by the fact that while he was still in San Antonio, enjoying the victory and pillage, General Arredondo discovered that the young officer who was becoming his favorite lieutenant had falsified the books of his regiment in order to cover gambling debts. Santa Anna had for some time escaped detection by forging Arredondo's signature to a check to cover the deficiency, saying to himself, "The general will be too busy to look into a thing like this." Santa Anna would have been dismissed from the army had not a military surgeon advanced him the money to cover the check. Santa Anna later repaid him in part, but never in full. However, matters of much greater importance now impinged, for Mexican patriots were beginning to assemble the power to throw off the Spanish yoke, not because they hated the mother country's government, one of the most congenial among the empires controlled by European nations, but because Spain insisted upon sending to high positions in Mexico officials who were abominably incompetent. The native-born criollos and mestizos were no longer satisfied with being denied the top positions in government, church, and army. As one young criollo aspirant said, "It isn't that we despise the incompetent peninsulares sent out from Spain. We also hate the competent ones. They must stay in Spain and let us run the country." So in the years 1813 to 1821, Mexico found itself immersed in a slow, seething turmoil, not quite revolution, but certainly not peace. Santa Anna's position in these semi-turbulent times consisted of three tenets which he was ready to defend. In a cynical, self-serving manner, he defended the Spanish monarchy, aware that, for the present at least, it represented the source of power. However, on the field of battle, he demonstrated repeatedly that his allegiance to Spain was not stinting. He was prepared to lay down his life for the king, and very nearly did on several heroic occasions. He defended the Catholic Church in much the same way. A prudent rather than a devout believer, he respected the Church as a source of power in public life and a treasury upon which he could draw in time of trouble. He could not comprehend why other nations were Protestant. Despite growing convictions in Mexico that the fueros, the special privileges for the clergy and military, should be ended, he continued to believe that the welfare of Mexico depended upon the continuance of special courts in which priests and army officers were tried with little chance of being found guilty. In simplest terms, clerics and military were above the civil law. These were the basic concepts on which he had been reared, and he swore never to abandon them. He did diverge from Spanish leadership on one trivial point. He thought it might be helpful if responsibility for Mexico's government were placed in the hands of persons born in Mexico, not mestizos or indios. God forbid, but men of pure-blooded Spanish inheritance like himself. The battle cry he uttered sometimes in the barracks was, "Abajan los cachupines, arriba la religión y los fueros." Down with the peninsulars from Spain, up with the Catholic Church and the rights protected by the special courts. By 1820, the Spanish-speaking world was in a state of chaos. In the homeland, progressive elements forced a repressive king to yield freedoms. The men of an army unit already on the dock in Spain with orders to board ship to fight revolutionary uprisings in the American colonies refused to sail, and their officers supported them, refusing also to enter the ship. Colonies long loyal to Spain now broke away to establish new nations throughout South America, still Spanish but free to follow new patterns. In Mexico, these new movements produced a confusion into which Santa Anna was soon drawn. Peninsulares, newly arrived from Spain and contaminated by liberal ideas sweeping the homeland, generated new animosities among local conservatives when they endeavored to introduce into Mexico the reforms which had become common in Spain. Specifically, when these peninsulares wanted to terminate a carryover from the old days, the more special privileges for the church or the military, conservative groups throughout Mexico felt obligated to resist. As a result, while homeland Spain became more liberal, colonial Mexico drew back in reaction until everybody except extreme rightists like Santa Anna began to realize that the nation could no longer be governed from Madrid. Men listened when a wonderfully handsome, charismatic, Mexican-born officer named Agustin de Iturbide, a general of course, issued his famous Plan de Iguala, calling for separation from Spain and for sensible reforms under a ruler who lived in Mexico. Although soldiers from all quarters flocked to Iturbide, Santa Anna remained steadfast in his support of the monarchy for 1 month.